He adopted a lost Apache girl and found her mother was a beautiful widow. Western drama story. The air smelled of dry grass, and a faint wind rustled through the sparse trees near the edge of Ethan Carter's homestead. Ethan, a tall, rugged man in his 40s, was returning from checking the fences along the western pasture. His life had always been one of routine, tending the land, caring for his horses, and maintaining his small but sturdy ranch. But today, something unusual caught his eye as he rode along the dusty trail that led to his homestead. At first he thought it was a bundle of cloth or perhaps a stray animal, but as he drew closer, he saw a small figure crouched near the side of a dry creek bed. The figure looked fragile and frightened, huddled against the wind. As Ethan slowed his horse, he noticed that it was a young girl, probably no older than 7 or 8. Her dark hair was tangled and dusty, and her clothes were torn and worn from travel. Her large, wide eyes reflected fear, confusion, and something else, an innocence that seemed untouched by the harshness of the world around her. Ethan carefully dismounted, keeping his hands visible so as not to scare her. "Hey there," he said softly, his voice calm and steady. "It's all right. You're safe." The girl flinched, her body shrinking back even more as she whispered words he could barely understand. She spoke in a language Ethan did not know, a melodic, strange tongue that carried the rhythm of her homeland. Even though he could not understand the words, he could feel the fear in her voice. She clutched a small bundle to her chest, which Ethan assumed contained her few belongings. Ethan approached slowly, speaking gently. "I'm Ethan. I live just over there," he said, pointing to his homestead not far from the creek. "You don't have to be afraid. I'll help you." The girl did not move at first. Her eyes darted from him to the open plains behind her, as if she were weighing whether to run. But the fear in her gaze was mixed with exhaustion. She could not have traveled far on her own. The land was wide and the sun was harsh. Ethan knelt a few feet away, lowering himself to her level. He took off his hat and set it on the ground, trying to show that he meant no harm. For a long moment there was silence. The only sounds were the soft whistling of the wind and the occasional call of a distant bird. Then, slowly, the girl took a cautious step toward him. Her bare feet were dusty, and her legs were scratched from thorns and brush. She whispered again, words that Ethan could not understand, but he noticed that her tone had softened and her body was slightly less tense. Ethan held out his hand gently, not wanting to scare her further. "You must be very tired," he said. "Come with me. I'll give you some food and water. You can rest at my home." After a tense moment, the girl nodded slightly. Ethan smiled softly and stood, offering his hand. She hesitated but eventually took it, her small fingers barely covering his large palm. Together, they walked back toward the ranch. As they moved, Ethan kept his voice low and calm, talking about simple things. The horses grazing in the pasture, the smell of the wildflowers, the way the wind felt on the open plains. The girl listened quietly, her eyes taking in every detail. When they reached the homestead, Ethan led her to the kitchen. He filled a bowl with warm water and offered her some bread and dried meat he had saved from his supplies. The girl took the food slowly, almost afraid it might disappear. She ate quietly, glancing up at Ethan every so often with wide, cautious eyes. Ethan watched her carefully, noticing the way her hands trembled slightly as she held the bowl. It was clear that she had been without care for some time. After she had eaten, Ethan brought her a clean blanket and a spare room in the small house. He did not want to overwhelm her, so he simply said, "You can rest here. There's a bed and some blankets. No one will bother you." The girl hesitated at the doorway, then stepped inside. She looked around the simple room, her eyes landing on the small wooden bed and the sunlight streaming through the window. For the first time that day, there was a hint of relief in her expression. She nodded quietly, and Ethan knew she was beginning to trust him, even if only a little. Over the next few days, Ethan slowly helped her adjust to life at the ranch. He gave her a name, Little Dawn, because of the way her dark eyes seemed to capture the light of the rising sun. At first, she barely spoke, communicating through gestures and occasional words in her own language. Ethan, patient and understanding, learned a few phrases from her, and she picked up simple English words in return. Life on the ranch became a new routine for Little Dawn. She helped Ethan with small tasks, bringing water to the horses, feeding the chickens, and gathering firewood. She was careful and attentive, her small hands learning quickly to handle the chores of ranch life. Ethan admired her determination and resilience. Despite everything she had been through, she had not lost her courage. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with deep reds and purples, Ethan and Little Dawn sat by the fire outside. The girl had been drawing shapes in the dirt with a stick, her concentration absolute. Ethan watched her silently, feeling a mixture of awe and protectiveness. "You know," he said softly, "I think you're very brave. You've been through a lot, but you're still here. That's something special." Little Dawn looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. For a moment, she seemed to understand, though she did not reply. Instead, she reached out and held his hand briefly, a gesture of trust and connection. Ethan felt a warmth in his chest, a feeling he had not expected when he first found her by the creek. Despite the growing bond, Ethan knew that taking in Little Dawn was not without challenges. The townsfolk had noticed her presence, and some were curious, others wary. Rumors began to spread, and Ethan had to navigate their questions carefully. Yet, he did not regret his decision. Every time he saw Little Dawn smile or hear her laugh, he knew he had made the right choice. As the nights grew colder, Ethan continued to teach her about the ranch and the world around her. He showed her how to care for the animals, how to read the sky for weather, and how to respect the land that had given him so much. Little Dawn absorbed everything eagerly, her small face lighting up with curiosity and wonder. Slowly, the bond between them became unbreakable. Ethan realized that this lost little girl had brought a new sense of purpose and joy into his life. In return, he gave her safety, warmth, and the beginnings of a home, a place where she could grow, learn, and feel loved. By the time the first snow began to dust the plains, Little Dawn was no longer a frightened stranger at the edge of the creek. She was part of Ethan's life, a presence that had transformed his quiet, solitary world into something richer and brighter. And though he knew the girl's past held pain and uncertainty, Ethan was determined to face whatever challenges lay ahead, protecting her with every ounce of his strength and care. For now, under the wide, star-filled sky of the western plains, Ethan and Little Dawn shared a simple truth, that even in a world full of hardships, compassion, patience, and trust could create a bond stronger than anything else. And as the fire crackled and the wind whispered through the trees, a sense of hope and belonging settled over the ranch, a new beginning for both the lost girl and the man who had found her. Days turned into weeks on Ethan Carter's homestead, and with each passing day, the bond between him and Little Dawn grew stronger. The little girl was slowly learning to trust the man who had saved her, and Ethan, in turn, felt a deep sense of responsibility for her safety and happiness. The ranch, which had once been quiet and lonely, was now filled with small signs of life. The sound of Little Dawn's laughter as she played near the chickens, the patter of her bare feet on the wooden floor, and the soft hum of her voice as she tried to repeat new English words. Ethan understood that trust could not be rushed. Little Dawn had been through so much, and her small heart carried the weight of fear and confusion. Some nights, she would wake crying, calling out in her native language for her mother, whose face she barely remembered. Ethan would sit beside her bed, holding her hand and speaking softly until her tears slowed. He never pushed her to talk about the past. Instead, he gave her patience, attention, and kindness, the quiet strength that a child needs to feel safe. One morning, Ethan decided it was time for Little Dawn to begin helping with the animals in a more meaningful way. He took her to the pasture where the horses grazed, the early sun casting long shadows across the ground. He knelt beside her and pointed to the horses. "These are gentle animals," he said. "If you're calm and steady, they will trust you. Treat them with care and they will respond with respect." Little Dawn listened intently, her small eyes wide with fascination. She reached out tentatively to touch the nearest horse, and Ethan watched as the animal sniffed her hand and then nudged her gently. A smile spread across her face, and she laughed softly, a sound that seemed to echo across the quiet plains. It was the first time Ethan had seen such unguarded joy on her face. As the days passed, little Dawn grew more confident. She learned to feed the chickens, gather eggs, and even help with the milking of the cows. Each task was a small step, a lesson in trust and responsibility. Ethan was patient, never scolding her for mistakes, but guiding her with gentle corrections. He noticed how quickly she picked up new skills, her mind sharp and attentive despite the hardships she had endured. At mealtimes, Ethan tried to engage her in conversation, though she often spoke in short, simple sentences. "Food good," she would say, pointing to the bread or vegetables on the table. "Horse big," she would remark with wide eyes as she watched the animals in the field. Ethan found these moments endearing, and he began teaching her simple words each day, using pictures and gestures. Over time, her vocabulary grew, and she started forming sentences, her confidence blossoming alongside her language skills. But learning to speak was not the only challenge. Little Dawn had to adjust to a world very different from the one she had known. She had lived in the Apache camps, where the rhythm of life was tied closely to the land, the seasons, and the traditions of her people. Now she had to adapt to the routines of ranch life, the structures of a small homestead, and the strange, foreign customs of the nearby town. Ethan recognized this and made sure she retained parts of her culture. He asked her to sing the small songs she remembered, to tell him the names of the plants and animals in her language, and even to teach him a few phrases. One afternoon, as Ethan was repairing a broken fence post, little Dawn came running to him, holding a bundle of wildflowers. She placed them in his hands and pointed to each bloom, saying the words in her native tongue. Ethan smiled, gently repeating the names after her. "You've got a good memory," he said. "These are beautiful. I'll put them in a jar on the table so we can always see them." It was during moments like these that Ethan felt a growing connection, not only with little Dawn, but with the broader world she represented. She was a bridge between two ways of life, the world of the plains he knew so well, and the traditions of the Apache people that were now part of her being. He realized that he was not just caring for a lost child, he was helping preserve her identity while guiding her towards safety and stability. Yet, despite these happy days, there were moments of tension. Little Dawn sometimes grew quiet and withdrawn, staring out at the horizon as if searching for something or someone she had lost. Ethan knew that she remembered her mother, even if she could not fully express it. One evening, as they sat by the fire, he asked gently, "Do you miss her?" Little Dawn's eyes filled with tears. She nodded, clutching the small blanket she carried everywhere. Ethan put his arm around her shoulder, holding her close. "I know," he said softly. "I can't bring her here just yet, but I promise we'll find her one day. You won't be alone forever." The little girl seemed to understand, though her sobs continued for a while. That night, Ethan stayed by her side until she fell asleep, thinking about the journey ahead. He knew that finding her mother would not be easy. The Apache people were spread across the plains, and news traveled slowly. But he also knew that he could not ignore the pull of family. It was a challenge he was willing to face, no matter how long it took. As the weeks turned into months, the ranch became a place of growth for both of them. Ethan taught little Dawn practical skills, how to mend a fence, how to milk a cow, how to cook a simple meal. In return, she brought a sense of lightness and joy to his life, reminding him of the innocence and wonder that he had forgotten in his own adulthood. One day, while walking along the creek near the edge of the property, little Dawn spotted a small bird struggling in the shallow water. She ran to it, gently cupping it in her hands. Ethan watched as she carefully lifted it from the water, speaking softly in her language as if to comfort the tiny creature. After a few moments, the bird fluttered its wings and flew away. Little Dawn laughed, her eyes shining with pride. "See, Ethan, it's okay now," she said. Ethan smiled. "You've got a good heart," he said. "Always remember that. That kindness will carry you far." It was in these small, everyday moments that their bond deepened. Little Dawn began to see Ethan not just as a caretaker but as a protector and a friend. She started sharing small details of her past, the songs her mother sang, the stories of the animals and land she had known, and the traditions she remembered. Ethan listened carefully, encouraging her to speak and validating her memories. He understood that honoring her past was as important as caring for her present. One chilly evening, as snowflakes began to dust the plains, Ethan and little Dawn worked together to prepare the barn for winter. They stacked hay, secured the gates, and checked on the animals. As they worked side by side, little Dawn suddenly looked up at Ethan. "Ethan, you family?" she asked in halting English. Ethan's heart tightened. He knelt down to her level, taking her hands in his. "Family isn't just about blood," he said softly. "It's about love and care. You are my family, little Dawn, always." The little girl's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not just of sadness. They were tears of comfort, understanding, and connection. She nodded, pressing her small hands against his chest. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of belonging, a sense of safety that she had not known since being lost. As the first full winter settled over the plains, Ethan reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. Little Dawn was no longer the frightened girl he had found by the creek. She was growing stronger, braver, and more confident every day. And Ethan had learned just as much from her, about patience, resilience, and the power of compassion. Evenings were filled with quiet moments by the fire, storytelling, and small lessons about life. Mornings were spent tending the animals, exploring the land, and laughing together at simple pleasures. Each day brought new challenges, but also new joys, and through it all, their bond deepened. Ethan knew that their journey was far from over. There were questions about little Dawn's past that remained unanswered, and the memory of her mother lingered in both of their hearts. But for now they had each other, and in the vast, open plains of the West, that was enough to bring hope, comfort, and the beginnings of a new life. Little Dawn, once lost and alone, was now learning to trust, to love, and to dream again. And Ethan, once a solitary rancher, had found purpose, connection, and a reason to believe that sometimes the smallest encounters could change a life forever. The first hints of spring began to touch the plains, melting the last traces of snow and turning the earth a soft brown, ready for new growth. Ethan Carter and little Dawn had settled into a quiet rhythm on the ranch, and while the little girl had grown more confident, there remained a shadow in her eyes, a quiet longing, a memory of someone she could barely recall. It was clear to Ethan that her past was not something she could leave behind entirely. He often wondered about her mother, imagining the woman who had given life to this small, brave child. One morning, Ethan decided to take little Dawn further into the surrounding land, past the hills and the creek, to teach her more about nature. They packed a small lunch, filled their canteens, and set off together, walking along the winding trails of the plains. The birds were beginning their songs again, and the air carried the faint scent of fresh grass and wildflowers. Little Dawn ran ahead a few steps, then turned back with a laugh that made Ethan smile. Her confidence in the world was growing, yet he could see she remained alert, her eyes scanning the horizon as if searching for someone she could not name. As they walked, Ethan spoke softly. "You know, the land holds many stories," he said. "If you look carefully, You can find signs of people who have been here before, animals that have traveled, and even clues about where someone might have gone. Little Dawn listened, tilting her head. Her dark eyes, so full of curiosity, scanned the ground as she picked up twigs and small stones. "Clues?" she asked, practicing her English. "Yes," Ethan replied. "Clues can tell us stories if we know how to read them. Sometimes a footprint, or a piece of cloth, or even something left behind can show us the way." They continued walking for hours, exploring dry creek beds and small clusters of trees. Ethan encouraged her to notice the small details, the way the grass was flattened in certain areas, the shapes of footprints in the soft mud, the way birds took flight suddenly. Little Dawn began to understand the idea, pointing out things that seemed unusual. "Horses passed here?" she asked, pointing to a set of prints. Ethan nodded, impressed by her attention to detail. As the afternoon wore on, they reached a small clearing near a bend in the creek. Here the ground seemed disturbed, and scattered around were remnants of a campfire, ashes, a broken pot, and a few scorched pieces of cloth. Ethan knelt to examine the scene. "Someone was here recently," he said. "This looks like a temporary camp. Perhaps travelers, or people from another settlement." Little Dawn's eyes widened as she looked at the ashes. Her small hands trembled slightly as she reached out and touched a charred piece of wood. She whispered in her native language, words Ethan did not understand, but he could feel the emotion behind them. He asked gently, "Does it remind you of home?" The little girl nodded slowly, tears forming in her eyes. "Mother, maybe," she said, her voice breaking. Ethan felt a pang in his chest. He realized that the search for her family was no longer something he could put off. Little Dawn's heart longed for the mother she had lost, and he had a responsibility to help her find her. "We'll find her," he promised. "I don't know when, but we will." The days that followed were filled with careful investigation. Ethan spoke to travelers passing through the nearby town, asking if they had seen a woman matching the description Little Dawn gave of her mother. He visited the Apache camps in the region, speaking respectfully to elders and anyone who might have news. Each interaction required patience and diplomacy, as he had to navigate cultural differences and build trust with people wary of outsiders. During this time, Little Dawn continued to grow in both confidence and language. She learned to communicate more clearly, describing her mother's appearance, her long dark hair, her gentle eyes, and her warm smile. She told Ethan stories she remembered, small fragments of life with her family before she became lost. Her memories were like tiny pieces of a puzzle, incomplete but precious. One day, while Ethan was visiting an Apache elder who lived a few miles away, he received a small but important clue. The elder remembered seeing a woman living quietly in a settlement to the north, a widow who had recently lost her husband. She was known for her beauty, her kindness, and the love she held for her daughter. Ethan's heart raced as he realized this could be the mother they were searching for. He thanked the elder, promising to approach carefully and with respect. Returning to the ranch, Ethan told Little Dawn about the possibility. She listened with wide eyes, her small hands clasped together tightly. "Mother real?" she asked, her voice trembling with hope. "Yes," Ethan replied. "We believe she is out there. Soon we might see her again. You have to be patient, but I promise we'll find her." Little Dawn hugged him tightly, resting her head against his chest. Ethan felt a deep warmth, realizing the trust she placed in him was profound. She had survived fear, loss, and uncertainty, yet she still had hope, and that hope was now intertwined with him. Over the next few days, Ethan made preparations for a journey to the settlement to the north. He packed supplies, ensured the horses were ready for travel, and explained to Little Dawn what they might encounter. He wanted her to be prepared, but he also wanted to protect her from disappointment if things did not go exactly as planned. The morning of their departure was crisp and bright. The plain stretched endlessly before them, and the wind carried the promise of change. Little Dawn rode beside Ethan, holding tightly to the reins, her eyes scanning the horizon. She was nervous but determined, aware that the journey might finally bring her closer to the mother she had been searching for in her dreams. As they traveled, Ethan and Little Dawn encountered small signs that made the heart quicken. A footprint in the soft earth that resembled the ones the elder had described, a piece of cloth caught in a bush, and even distant smoke rising in the wind from a distant settlement. Each sign, however small, brought hope and encouraged them to continue. During the evenings, they camped under the stars, sharing simple meals by the fire. Little Dawn would draw pictures in the dirt, sketching a woman she hoped was her mother, and Ethan would encourage her to tell stories about what she remembered. They spoke quietly, careful not to disturb the peace of the plains, yet the bond between them grew even stronger. Ethan realized that these quiet moments of shared hope and determination were shaping both of their hearts, binding them in ways deeper than words. After several days of travel, they finally approached the settlement. It was a small cluster of homes, surrounded by fences and fields. Ethan slowed the horses as he observed the area, looking for any sign of the woman described by the elder. Little Dawn's small hand gripped his tightly, her eyes wide with anticipation and fear. Ethan dismounted and led the horses to a secure area before speaking to the people in the settlement. He asked respectfully about the woman, describing her as best he could. The people exchanged glances, and then one of the older women nodded. "I think you speak of Isabella," she said. "She lives just a few houses down, quietly keeping to herself since her husband passed. She is a good woman, gentle and kind. And you have a child with you." Little Dawn's eyes filled with tears as Ethan explained her connection to Isabella. The woman nodded again, then turned and walked ahead to fetch Isabella. A few minutes later, a figure appeared at the doorway, a tall, graceful woman with long dark hair, her face showing both beauty and sorrow. She stopped abruptly as she saw Little Dawn, her eyes widening in disbelief and recognition. The little girl who had waited so long for this moment stepped forward slowly. "Mother," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Isabella's eyes filled with tears as she ran to her daughter, gathering her in her arms. Little Dawn clung to her mother, sobbing with relief and joy. Ethan watched quietly from a distance, feeling a mix of pride, relief, and a quiet ache. He had known this moment would be emotional, but seeing it unfold so purely was more powerful than he could have imagined. For Isabella, the reunion was overwhelming. Her daughter, lost for so long, was finally back in her arms. She looked up at Ethan, gratitude and respect in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "You kept her safe when I could not. You gave her life again." Ethan nodded, a small smile on his face. "She was never alone," he said, "and now she is with you where she belongs." That night, as Little Dawn slept safely between her mother and Ethan, he reflected on the journey. The search had been long and uncertain, filled with questions and obstacles, yet it had brought them to this moment of reunion. He realized that life on the plains was unpredictable, but compassion, patience, and determination could lead to moments of profound joy. Little Dawn had finally found her mother, and in doing so, Ethan had discovered something as well: the power of hope, trust, and the quiet courage that binds people together, even across the vast, open land of the West. The morning sun shone gently over the small settlement, casting soft shadows across the dirt paths and wooden homes. Birds chirped in the trees, and the scent of fresh bread and herbs drifted from the small kitchens. Little Dawn clutched Ethan's hand tightly as they approached the modest house where Isabella lived. Her small heart was racing, full of excitement and fear, and Ethan could feel the tension in her grip. He knelt for a moment and looked into her eyes. "Remember, Little Dawn," he said softly, "your mother is waiting, and she will love you just as much as you've imagined. Take a deep breath and be brave." The girl nodded, her dark eyes shining with a mix of hope and nervousness. Together, they stepped forward. Ethan rapped gently on the wooden door, and a few moments later the door opened. Isabella stood there, her tall frame and graceful posture radiating both strength and warmth. Her eyes widened immediately at the sight of the small figure before her. "Little Dawn," she whispered, as if speaking the name would make the moment more real. The little girl's small voice trembled. "Mother," she said, barely audible. Then, as if a dam had broken, she ran forward and threw her arms around her mother. Isabella caught her instantly, holding her close, rocking her slightly as tears streamed down both of their faces. Ethan stood back, watching quietly. His heart ached and swelled at the same time. He had spent so long protecting this child, nurturing her, and teaching her to trust again. And now to see her finally reunited with her mother, to witness that pure, unfiltered joy, was more emotional than he had anticipated. Isabella's voice shook as she whispered into her daughter's hair. "Oh, my sweet girl, I never thought I'd see you again. I searched for you every day. I prayed for you, and now you're here." Little Dawn clung tightly, burying her face against her mother's shoulder, her small body trembling with relief and happiness. After a few minutes, Isabella lifted her daughter slightly to look into her eyes. She studied the little face before her, noticing the signs of both hardship and resilience. "You've been through so much," she said softly. "But look at you, you're brave and you've grown stronger than I ever imagined." Ethan stepped forward gently. "She's an amazing child," he said. "She learned quickly, worked hard, and never lost hope. I promise you she was never alone. She's safe now." Isabella nodded, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, turning to Ethan, "for keeping her safe, for loving her when I could not. You've given her life again." Ethan shook his head humbly. "It was my honor," he said. "She taught me as much as I taught her. And I will continue to help both of you however I can." Little Dawn, still clinging to her mother, looked up at Ethan. "Ethan, home safe," she said softly. Her words were simple, but they carried so much meaning. She had experienced loss, fear, and uncertainty, yet she had found safety, trust, and love. Isabella pulled her daughter closer and spoke gently. "We will take care of you now, Little Dawn. And we will always be together from this day forward." The little girl's eyes sparkled with joy, and a smile spread across her face, lighting up the room. For the next several hours, the reunion continued with quiet, intimate conversations. Isabella asked countless questions about the time little Dawn had spent with Ethan, listening with fascination and gratitude as the girl described life on the ranch. Little Dawn shared her stories with enthusiasm, pointing out small animals, chores, and moments that had made her happy. Ethan watched, feeling a quiet satisfaction. He had not only protected her life but had helped shape it in ways that gave her strength and joy. As the day turned into evening, Isabella invited Ethan to stay for supper. They sat together at a small wooden table, passing bowls of stew and freshly baked bread. The warmth of the fire complemented the warmth in their hearts. Little Dawn chattered happily, occasionally giggling at Ethan's attempts to repeat words in her native language. The sounds of laughter and conversation filled the small home, a stark contrast to the silence and loneliness that had once defined their lives. After supper, Isabella led Ethan to a small garden behind the house. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the flowers and vegetables. She paused for a moment, looking at Ethan with gratitude and respect. "You have a good heart," she said softly. "I can see why little Dawn trusts you so completely. I would be honored if you remained part of our lives even after this day." Ethan's eyes softened. He had not expected such an invitation, yet it felt natural. He had grown to love both little Dawn and Isabella in his own way, and the thought of remaining a part of their lives filled him with a quiet joy. "I would be glad to," he said, "if you'll have me." Isabella smiled, and little Dawn clapped her hands excitedly. It was a moment of harmony, a blending of lives that had been separated by circumstance but now united by trust, love, and mutual respect. Over the next few days, Ethan helped Isabella and little Dawn settle into a new routine. He taught them ways to manage the small farm, shared knowledge about the land, and continued to encourage little Dawn's growth and learning. Isabella welcomed his guidance and support, and together, they formed a partnership rooted in care and shared responsibility. Little Dawn thrived in this new environment. She felt secure in her mother's love and confident in the continued support of Ethan, who had been a steady presence through her most uncertain days. Her laughter became more frequent, her curiosity more adventurous, and her trust in the world stronger than ever before. Ethan, too, felt a transformation within himself. The quiet rancher who had once lived alone on the open plains had discovered a new sense of purpose. He had not only protected a lost child, but had become part of a family he had never expected. He realized that life could bring unexpected challenges and joys, and that the courage to act with kindness and compassion could change lives in ways he had never imagined. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of pink and gold, Ethan, Isabella, and little Dawn sat together outside. Little Dawn leaned against her mother, while Ethan's arm rested lightly around both of them. The plain stretched endlessly before them, calm and peaceful under the fading light. "Do you remember when I found you by the creek?" Ethan asked softly, breaking the silence. Little Dawn nodded, her small hands clutching a handful of grass. "Yes, scared," she said simply, her voice filled with memory. Ethan smiled. "You were very brave, and look at you now, strong, happy, and full of hope. I am proud of you, little Dawn." Her eyes sparkled and she smiled shyly. "Thanks, Ethan." Isabella reached out and held both of their hands. "We are all lucky," she said. "Little Dawn found safety and I found my daughter again, and we found a friend we can always trust. This is a new beginning for all of us." The little girl yawned, her eyes heavy with the day's excitement and emotion. Isabella gently picked her up, carrying her inside to bed, while Ethan followed, making sure everything was ready for the night. The small home, once quiet and simple, now hummed with the warmth of love, trust, and the promise of tomorrow. As Ethan stepped outside, he looked up at the wide, star-filled sky. The plains stretched endlessly, a world of possibility and wonder. He realized that even in the harshness of life, moments of kindness, courage, and compassion could create bonds that lasted forever. The reunion had not only restored a family but had shown Ethan the power of human connection, the strength of trust, and the beauty of hope fulfilled. Little Dawn had found her mother, and together they had built a life that was safe, joyful, and full of promise. And Ethan, once a solitary man on the plains, had discovered that family could take many forms, each one precious, each one worth protecting with all his heart. As the night settled over the settlement, the three of them sat quietly, watching the stars emerge one by one. It was a moment of peace, a moment of triumph, and a moment of love. In that stillness, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as a family bound not just by blood but by trust, care, and the enduring power of the human heart. The days following the reunion were filled with a quiet, steady happiness that seemed to settle over the small homestead like a gentle blanket. Little Dawn woke each morning with a smile, running to her mother's side and sharing the simple joys of the day, watching the horses, collecting eggs from the chickens, or helping Isabella prepare meals. Ethan was there every step of the way, guiding the child gently, helping with the chores, and making sure both mother and daughter felt safe and supported. It was a new kind of life for all of them, one built on trust, patience, and the warmth of shared experiences. Little Dawn thrived under her mother's loving care, yet she also cherished the steady presence of Ethan, who had been her protector when she had felt most alone. Their days were simple but full. Morning chores followed by small lessons on the land, afternoons spent exploring the surrounding fields, and evenings around the fire sharing stories, laughter, and gentle conversation. One morning, as the sun rose golden over the plains, little Dawn and Ethan were tending to the horses when Isabella joined them, carrying a basket of freshly baked bread. She smiled warmly, observing how much the little girl had grown in confidence and spirit. "You've taught her well," she said softly to Ethan. "She moves with grace, she cares for the animals, and she listens carefully. You've helped shape her courage." Ethan smiled humbly. "She has courage in her already. I just helped her see it," he said. Little Dawn glanced up at him, her eyes bright with a mixture of admiration and affection. She mimicked a small bow, and Ethan chuckled. As the days passed, they continued to settle into their new rhythm. Little Dawn learned to read more fluently, practiced her English, and shared stories of the Apache traditions her mother had once taught her. Ethan encouraged these stories, understanding that her heritage was an important part of her identity. Isabella joined in, teaching her daughter additional customs and songs, blending the lessons from her past with the skills she was learning now. The small homestead became a place of laughter, growth, and safety. Friends and neighbors from the settlement noticed the change, admiring the quiet strength of the little family and the bond that had formed between Ethan, Isabella, and little Dawn. Some stopped by to share news, offer help with the farm, or simply enjoy the warmth of their company. And through it all, Ethan remained a steady, quiet presence, sometimes a teacher, sometimes a guide, and always a friend. One afternoon, while little Dawn played near the creek, she found a small, smooth stone shaped like a heart. She ran to Ethan and Isabella, holding it up excitedly. "Look," she exclaimed. "Heart, safe family." Isabella knelt and took her daughter's hand. "Yes, my sweet girl. You are safe. You have a family who loves you, and nothing can change that." She looked at Ethan and smiled. "And we have you too, Ethan. You are part of our family now." Ethan felt a warmth in his chest that words could not fully express. "It's an honor," he said softly. "And I'll always be here for both of you." Winter eventually gave way to spring again, and the cycle of life on the plains continued. Ethan taught little Dawn more about the land, how to read the weather, how to care for the animals, and how to respect the natural world around them. Isabella focused on nurturing her daughter's heart and mind, teaching her stories from their culture, guiding her in small daily lessons, and sharing the warmth and love she had once feared she would never be able to provide. Together, the three of them became a small but strong unit. They faced challenges, of course, the occasional harsh storm, a sick animal, or the constant demands of working the land, but they faced them together, each contributing in their own way. Little Dawn learned to act with confidence. Isabella gained support and friendship, and Ethan discovered a sense of belonging and purpose he had never known before. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, they gathered outside for a simple supper. The air was warm, carrying the scent of wildflowers and fresh hay. Little Dawn chattered happily, sharing stories of her day, while Isabella smiled and listened, sometimes adding her own small remarks. Ethan tended the fire, occasionally glancing at both of them, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction and peace. After supper, they sat together, watching the stars emerge one by one. Little Dawn rested against her mother, her small hand tucked into Ethan's. The plains stretched endlessly around them, calm and quiet, as if holding its breath for the moment. "You know," Ethan said softly, "life can be unpredictable. We never know what each day will bring. But moments like this, moments where we find each other, trust each other, and care for one another, those moments are what make it all worthwhile." Isabella nodded, brushing a stray lock of hair from little Dawn's face. "You've taught us that, Ethan. Sometimes family isn't only about blood. It's about love, trust, and being there for each other no matter what." Little Dawn yawned and snuggled closer to her mother. "Love, family," she whispered, her words simple but filled with meaning. Ethan smiled, a quiet pride and warmth spreading through him. Yes, little Dawn, that's right. And that's what we have now, a family together. Over the next weeks, the homestead thrived not only with the growth of the crops and the health of the animals, but also with the growth of love, trust, and connection. Ethan and Isabella developed a partnership built on respect, friendship, and shared responsibility. Little Dawn flourished under their combined care, her laughter ringing across the plains, her curiosity endless and her spirit resilient. One day, as Ethan and Isabella worked side by side in the garden, little Dawn ran to them, holding a bundle of wildflowers. She placed them carefully in a small jar and looked up at both of them. "For family," she said simply. Isabella smiled warmly and hugged her daughter. "Thank you, my sweet one. We will treasure these always." She glanced at Ethan. "And thank you, Ethan, for everything you've done. You've given us a gift we cannot repay: hope, trust, and love." Ethan shook his head gently. "I've received just as much as I've given. Seeing both of you happy, safe, and together, that's more than I could have ever hoped for." The little family continued their life on the plains, facing each day with courage, patience, and care. The challenges of the land remained, but they no longer felt insurmountable. Together, they had built a home filled with warmth, laughter, and the quiet strength of love. One evening, as the wind carried the scent of wildflowers across the plains, little Dawn sat quietly between Isabella and Ethan, looking out over the land. She felt safe, cherished, and truly part of something greater than herself. For the first time since being lost, she felt complete. Isabella held her close. "You found your home now, my darling," she said softly, "and we will always be here for you." Ethan smiled, resting his hand on hers. "No matter what comes, we face it together," he said. The sun set, the sky a deep canvas of purples and oranges, and the three of them sat quietly, listening to the sounds of the plains. In that stillness, there was peace, love, and the quiet assurance that their bond would endure, no matter what. They had found one another, healed the pain of the past, and discovered the true meaning of family. Little Dawn, once lost and alone, now had two people who would protect, guide, and love her unconditionally. Isabella, who had feared losing her daughter forever, had found the joy of reunion and the support of a kind, steady friend in Ethan. And Ethan, once a solitary man living quietly on the plains, had found purpose, connection, and a family bound not by circumstance but by trust, care, and love. As night fell and stars glittered overhead, the three of them walked together across the plains, their figures casting long shadows in the soft light of the moon. The world around them was vast and full of unknowns, yet they faced it with confidence, courage, and the certainty that they were no longer alone. The plains had witnessed their journey, a story of loss, hope, and the enduring strength of the human heart. And as the wind whispered softly through the grass, it seemed to carry a promise that with love, patience, and trust, even the most difficult paths could lead to joy, family, and new beginnings. And so, together, they stepped forward into the future, hearts intertwined, ready to embrace whatever adventures life on the western plains would bring. The little girl who had been lost was now found, her mother's arms her home, and the man who had saved her forever a part of their lives. A family shaped not only by fate but by courage, compassion, and the quiet power of love.